Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. I am so excited today to bring back my friend, Lindsay Tozer. You are at the very beginning of season 4 as we are taking a deep dive into the Enneagram and forgiveness. Now, before I get started, I do want to talk a little bit about what that means. We mean essentially that we are using the Enneagram as a neutral tool to help us understand ourselves. We're not putting anything on it besides calling it a neutral tool to help us understand how God made us. And so, Lindsay, welcome to the Wednesdays with Watson episode. We were just saying you are a 3-timer here on the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. So welcome. Your episodes are among some of the most listened to, which just says how much you're loved. And so thank you for being here today and for working with all of the
Absolutely.
technical difficulties that we've had.
Absolutely. Happy to be here, Amy. Thank you very much.
Well, I have been looking forward to this because you are an Enneagram type 2, which
Mhm.
it was funny because when I asked you to be on the podcast and you took the test and you sent it back to me, I was like, of course she's a 2. I don't even know why. I don't even know why I had you take the test. And to that end, listeners, you can I will link in the show notes where you can take that test. It's a free test where you can basically learn your Enneagram type. Well, as just by means of introduction, especially since this is only the second episode in this series, I do want to tell the listeners and you too, Lindsay, really what we're going to talk about today. It's a little bit different than just talking about the Enneagram. It's a lot different than just talking about forgiveness. It is talking about, I had the privilege of having Jeff and Beth McCord on my
Mhm.
podcast, and that episode aired before this one, and they have written a book that dropped September the 20th called More Than Your Number. And essentially, that book is about how, yes, we are our main number. So Lindsay and I are both 2s, but we are more than that. While all of us have each of the 9 types of personalities in us, we also have paths that we take and
Right.
that where we can reach into and use the skills or not skills of any other Enneagram types. And we'll talk about that a lot more. There's some words too that I'm going to use that I just want to make sure that everybody understands. This is a podcast, as everyone knows, on trauma. And so I know that there's a lot of trauma people who have had trauma out there listening, and you are thinking in your head, I am listening to a podcast on forgiveness, but Lindsay, you don't understand what happened to me. And you're right, we don't. But we are going to attempt to talk to you today about forgiveness, and our scripture that we have tied to this season is not going to be surprising to anybody. It's Ephesians 4:32. Be ye kind one to another, tenderhearted, compassionate, forgiving one another, even as Christ has forgiven you. And there's also, of course, that what I call the scariest verse in the Bible, where Jesus says, "If you don't forgive, I won't forgive you." And we can pontificate for years about that, but I would go so far as to say that I believe that the ability to forgive is a fruit of having been forgiven and receiving Jesus in your heart as your personal savior. And if you don't know him, we will make sure you do by the end of this episode. So in the book, More Than a Number, Jeff and Beth McCord ascertain that we're always our main number. So Lindsay will always be a 2, I will always be a 2, but we have access to these other numbers.
Mhm.
But that in the Enneagram itself, which is where it goes all the way back to 400 AD, uh, really helps us understand why we do things. And so, different from other personality tests, it helps us understand why we do things. And so, the core fear of both Lindsay and me as an Enneagram Type 2 is the fear of being unwanted or unloved. And we're
Mhm.
going to talk today about forgiveness when our core fear has been realized. And we're going to talk about access to our what we call our wings, which is the numbers on either side of us. So 1 and 3, and then our path, which is 4 and 8. And that'll just come up naturally in conversation. But there's also going to be two, 4 other words that I'm going to use that I want to make sure everyone understands. And that's aligned and misaligned. And so everyone knows what those words mean, but aligned with the gospel, misaligned with the gospel. So aligned with Ephesians 4:32, aligned with Genesis 1:26, aligned with Psalms 139, and misaligned with it, and operating as a wounded child or an orphan child versus operating as a beloved child, which we get to do because of the completed work of Jesus on the cross. So type twos out there are for those of you who love us. Let me just read some of what misaligned twos may present themselves as in the world. And unfortunately, this is most of the time me, unless I make sure that I am on my knees in front of him. But we need to be highly involved with others, communicate through flattery, manipulating, shaming. We can be martyrs. We can often help people to be recognized. We can get angry when we're not thanked or appreciated. And so those are just some of the behaviors that are not so fun, right?
Sure.
When we realize that we're unwanted and unloved. And so something will happen and I'll start to act like that and I'll be like, why am I acting like that? And I can almost always tie it to my core fear being realized. And then I have to align myself back with the gospel, back with the truth, back with the fact that I am made in the image of God, that I'm precious in his sight, all of the things that we talk about all the time on this podcast. And so, and then when we act as a wounded child, like we were literally plucked on this earth with no resources, no God, no nothing. We're an orphan. We walk through this world operating as a wounded child, and often these behaviors of a type 2 will come out where we can be manipulative. We can we're the people that walk in the room and we feel the room, we know the room, we help the room, and most of the time we help the room with good intentions, but sometimes we help the room because we need something inside of us. Our core sin, or if you will, or our core weakness is pride. And those are things that wounded, unaligned type 2s, that's how we identify. That's how people know, and so people around me go, what's going on? And as I have grown in my own knowledge of how God made me as a type 2, when these things begin to stir up in me, I then step back and investigate, okay, what's going on here? And sometimes it's not that I feel unwanted or unloved. Sometimes it's one of these other parts will show up that we'll talk about. So with all of that being said, Lindsay, first things first out of the gate, and you're my third interview today, and so far the first two answers have been jaw-dropping to me. Tell me what forgiveness means to you.
Forgiveness to me means not harboring harsh feelings towards others, which includes myself, because I can harbor a lot of harsh feelings towards myself because a lot of internal guilt, if you will, for various things. And if someone apologizes and is genuine about that, then we are called to forgive them and move forward, which is exactly what Jesus demonstrated and preaches all through, the Bible. And, but really to the core, it's, you have to reset yourself. You have to reset every day. Every day is a new day. Tomorrow is not promised. So why would I carry over feelings of hurt and pain into the next day? Now, of course, saying that is extremely simple, easier said than done. I'm my own worst critic when it comes to that. And I find I know that I'm not always able to do that internally, but externally, I do my best every day to reset. And some people who I love deeply in my life, and some people who I barely know, that they know what happened to me the day before, and they see me the next day and they're like, how do you do that? How do you just reset every morning? And because my body responds to trauma the way that it does, which we've talked previously about, I know enough about myself now and I know tomorrow I'm going to continue to learn more. But if I carry it with me into the next day, it's only going to continue to regurgitate that trauma all over again, no
Yeah.
matter what it was. So I have to forgive, and I have to put it to bed. And when I go to bed at night and wake up the next day, it's a new set. I reset, I refocus, the best that I can. And that's not to say internally I still struggle. A lot of that is externally, people can see that. But you can't, it doesn't do anybody any good to carry it from one day to the next at all.
And you're on one of the most popular episodes on the Wednesday was with Watson episode. We called it moving beyond the wreckage, the body keeps the score. And this is just a plug to go back and listen to that, because you're right. Because when we hold on to things, it is more far reaching than just disobeying a commandment of the Bible, right?
Exactly.
It really is. And as we build into this episode, this idea of each of our Enneagram internal profiles and how we have access to other parts of us. And so a wing of a two of you and me is one. And so I just want to point out something, and I will throughout the interview as I hear you say things. One of the hallmarks of the Enneagram type 1 is the inner critic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's loud and it's indicting and it's mean.
Yeah.
And the type 2 is not close behind when it comes to an inner critic. And so when it comes to forgiving an ought, oftentimes, I don't know about you, but oftentimes, and this was especially true, and the interview with you is going to be very different than the interview with everybody else, because I am a two, and so I'm talking to a two. But I know for me, especially during like my domestic violence marriage, every time an incident would happen, I would forgive. And I'm kind of air quoting when I say that. And what I mean by that is I would just gloss over it and hope for a better day the next day.
Right.
And I think the reason I did that was because my core fear of being unwanted and unloved was met with a punch, with a slap, with a verbal whatever. And so it was easier for me to forgive, hoping that not making a big deal out of it or addressing it would make it go away. And I remember Lindsay laying in bed at night, literally remembering that scripture where one of the disciples said, "How many times are we to forgive?" And Jesus said 70 times 7. And I remember laying in bed at night saying, surely we've gotten to 490 by now. I mean, literally,
Right.
that's that, you know what I'm saying? Like, surely
I
we've
do.
gotten to 490 by now. And so I want to point out to type 2s out there before we move into a little bit of Lindsay's story of one of her many, I'm sure, story of forgiveness is, at least from my perspective, I want to speak into type 2s to, when we talk about forgiveness, we are probably the type that is going to be more likely to extend it easier. We
Mm-hmm.
have to ask ourselves why, though. We have to ask ourselves, am I forgiving because I don't want more rejection?
Right.
Am I ignoring it? Am I pushing it down because I don't want more rejection?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I forgiving because I've been forgiven, and all the things that you just so eloquently said, it doesn't do anybody any good. And so type 2s out there, if you're like listening to this going, I don't have any problems forgiving, I forgive very easily, investigate as to why you do that.
Yeah.
Because for me, most of the time, it is because I hate conflict,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to be wanted, and I want to be loved. And I
Right.
will walk out of a room before I will put the boxing gloves on and duke it out with somebody. And I do, my friend Chrissy, who I do life very closely with, she, she has taught me not to walk out of a room and stay there and deal with it. And at the end of it, forgive, and I'm still wanted and I'm still loved. And so, like I said, this episode is going to be a little bit different than the others, because I'm going to be introducing and putting those things in there as my own experience as a type 2. is that I had to investigate, why do I forgive? Do I forgive because I'm commanded to forgive, or because if I don't forgive, my core fear is going to be triggered again? And so, you know what I'm saying?
I do. Yeah, it's this gray area that for me, I find myself balancing. And I think you might find that too with yourself and some of the other of type twos out there. You know, it's you have to find that balance, that where are you within that, you know? And you're exactly right. Am I forgiving because I have a fear of being alone? Sure, probably. But I also know in the back of my head that, and at the front of my heart, that we are called to forgive.
Right.
So it's finding that balance between the two and then marrying them together. And then, and then it's like, oh, this makes sense. But at the same, for many, many years, um, and for those who have listened and have heard about my PTSD and my car accident in the previous two episodes I've been in, you don't get to that space overnight.
Right.
It takes years. It takes years of counseling and therapy and self-reflection and talking with people and listening to others, and then you can come right back around to it and have to sit in it again and try and figure it out. And everybody's different. I get that. I appreciate and I love that about all of us, in this world that we live in. um Balance, though.
Yeah.
Balance, you know, if there's one takeaway that anybody takes from today, you have to find your balance.
Yeah.
And that's where the internal struggle gets so hard, is because you can end up fighting with yourself internally. You know, why am I walking out of this room, like you were talking about? Am I, you know, am I doing battle with myself? You know, why are these people looking at me this way? Why is nobody talking to me? Why am I sitting here by myself? Why do I have all these people coming at, you know? So it's trying to figure out not only where you fit in, but then am I going to say something just because it's not easy for, and I'm talking about me, am I going to say something that it's going to sound stupid?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm not one who can shoot from the hip. I have to sit in it and think about it. And then if I do find myself shooting from the hip, then I get nervous and like I just want to roll my tongue back in my mouth and shut it and go away into a corner, because I'm like, what did I just say? Or if it didn't get the response that I wanted or was looking for, then I immediately feel like I messed up. I have to leave now because I don't want anybody to think different of me. And then I'll find myself texting, and I'm so sorry if I said this and I hurt your feelings.
Right.
I did it 2 weeks ago to a friend of mine. I said, I'm really sorry if what I feel like what I said was kind of rude. In the moment, I didn't feel like he texted me back. He's like, "What are you talking
Yeah,
about?"
what
I'm
are you
like,
talking about?
"Whatever."
I
You
want to
know,
point out, yeah, I want to point out here, because this is because I said that I would throughout the, so again, this Enneagram internal profile. So the other number that you and I have access to is the 3. And the 3 really cares about how it looks,
yes,
right? And
yes,
you just eloquently said that, you know, like, oh, did it get received wrong, and that kind of thing. And so yeah, there's this huge importance of finding a balance. And so Lindsay, I've known you for a long time,
yes, ma'am.
and have walked, I want to say with you. I wish I could walk closer to you, but we've been in community, albeit usually by text or something like this, for a long time. And there was a period in your life, and I don't know whether this was the period that you're going to choose to share or not, where you were given lots of opportunities to forgive. Let's put it to you that way. But I would wondering if you could briefly share with us, and I've asked everybody to do this, a time when you forgave, because I want other type twos out there to say, "Oh, I walk it like that too," or be encouraged by something you say, or know that it's possible. But I will tell you that it's been cool to watch you grow. Speaking of that and balance, because I've known you for a long time, I watched you get hurt a lot, and I see who I'm looking at today. And so I don't know if you're going to share any of what's in my head, but can you tell us just a short story of an opportunity that you had to forgive somebody?
Do I have permission to give two?
You have permission to give too.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. The first story of forgiveness that I have, and I know this is going to live out in Autoland forever, so I'm not going to use any names. But there's an individual who I was very, very close with, and she recently passed away, and we didn't always see eye to eye on things. Um, but in the moment, actually, this has happened twice. Um, but in that moment where it was the last, few months of her life, um, I had to forgive her in my heart and then ask for forgiveness as well. And then in turn, um, we had this unspoken forgiveness of each other. And which has with the first friend that this happened with, who passed away, I had one of the blessed opportunities to be there, with her in the last 72 hours of her life. In the most recent friend that this happened with, I walked the whole walk with her, to the end, to the very last day. So it's and I miss them both dearly. And it's so having to forgive each other at an end of life scenario, is pretty difficult and humbling at the same time, because you don't want to ever walk into that situation going, okay, I have to forgive you, and I have to ask for forgiveness, and knowing that that person's going to die.
Because you're going to die. Yeah.
Right. Um, the so I guess that was two. So my third one, is I have to forgive myself. And that is one of the most difficult wounds to heal. That is still healing. And I had to forgive myself, in order to be able to grieve properly.
Yeah.
And with that comes forgiving others, in the same involved in the same story, but not being able to actually speak it to them. Um,
And
for a variety.
can I stop you there just for a
Absolutely.
second, because I think that the listeners need some context here, and even though
Yes,
this
I'm so
here,
sorry. Yeah.
no, I want to give the context, because and don't be sorry, because I did ask for it to be short, but I think this is important. And you can go back and listen to both of Lindsay's episodes. Moving beyond the wreckage, the body keeps the score is the story that I'm getting ready to tell you. And hopefully without crying. But Lindsay, years and years ago, was babysitting some children and was in a horrific car accident, and one of the children died. And the fallout from that has been massive, to Lindsay's life. But when she referred to having to forgive people who she didn't get the opportunity to talk to, I'm assuming, Lindsay, that you're talking about the parents of these children, the family members of these children. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And so, as it doesn't matter what type you are in a situation like that, when when you have to forgive, and then you have to forgive yourself, even though it was an accident. Um, the weight of that is heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to live in the misalignment at that point. It's easy to feel like I'm not worth walking in this world as a beloved child of God, of Jesus, who paid the price, the ultimate price. And I say it, I've said it many times already today, that his blood changed the earth, right? And so, for those listeners out there, forgiving yourself has been something that's come up in all three interviews today. And so when Lindsay, and then Lindsay, talk a little bit more about the difficulty in those parents, right? and you have to go back and listen to the episode because we address it a lot more. But the lack of closure there,
Yes.
and the way you were treated, because it was an accident. And of course, they were hurting and wounded and all the things. But when we flip this on its ear and you needed forgiveness that was not extended to you, turned into 20 years of you just about destroying yourself. And so when we talk about forgiving ourselves, especially since the last time we talked about this, what are some steps that you've made to do that?
I've gone to grief recovery counseling with the grief recovery method. I have beaten myself up a lot. Has and I've had to peel back the layers, if you will, to and that's where I came around with, forgiving myself, which is one of the hardest things to do, because then there's a lot that I'm not going to unwrap right now.
Right.
But that's just, there's a lot of self-reflection, there's a lot of journaling, there's a lot of hurting yourself. For me, it was never physical in the sense that you would think of physical harm, but it was physical in the sense of food and trying to find other avenues to find that comfort.
Right.
When really at the end of the day, and that's talking with, struggles with guilt and a lot of negative self-talk, and not having healthy boundaries, and figuring out, okay, why am I responding this way? I mean, it was a lot of counseling, a lot of therapy. I will say that the last couple of months have been particularly difficult on me, to where it's been hard for me to get past that. Some moments I get stuck in myself. So I have, I am on some medication right now that's helping to balance that. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Nope.
It's prescribed, it's monitored, and it's okay. And because when this first happened, I was on medication, and then I came off of it. I told myself I don't ever want to go back on it again. And so I had to deal with that as well, and forgive myself, saying it's okay
Yeah.
to get some of that intervention as well.
Well, and I think that this is another place to point out the Enneagram internal profile, because the type 1, which is your one of your wings, fears being bad, right?
Right.
Their
Right.
core fears being bad. They want to be right. They're the people that, no, I have, obviously I'm a one wing, and I can identify some places in my life where one shows up. People joke that people who are true type 1s, like when they see a status update or something, they can pick every error out of there. But the
Right.
type 1, number one, has the loudest inner critic, like I just mentioned. But they need to hear something, and I feel very led to tell you what they need to hear today, and what they need to hear, and what is true, and in the alignment of the gospel, and living as a beloved child and not an orphan, is you are good.
Mm-hmm.
And you are good because of nothing that you've done, good or bad. You are good because you are the precious daughter of the Most High God. You are good because of the completed work of Jesus on the cross.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that that is such a universal truth, Lindsay, that I could sit across hopefully what would be a big barrier of glass from a serial killer and tell him or her the same thing, because
Yeah.
that is the truth of the
Right.
gospel.
It
And
is.
and so if you were walking around in this world saying I'm a 2 and my core fear is being unwanted and unloved, and you framed everything around that, that's good because it's your main number. But if you didn't understand the need, what do I need to hear? What do my other parts of me need to hear? is that you are good. Like if I was in, if I were a counselor and could do EMDR and all of that, that would be my message to you with paddles in your hand, with one part talking to the other part to your brain is you are good. You are good because this is something that Satan has indicted you and over and over and over and required this forgiveness of yourself when really there is nothing to forgive. And so I think it's important to bring that up here. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, I the premiere episode to this season actually was just I kind of freshened it up because I couldn't have told it any better than I did when I did an episode called Forgiving Trauma Makers. And when I really began to understand that forgiveness was important was when my mom was on a ventilator and they said, come sign the papers to take her off. Right. And I didn't forgive her. I wouldn't even pick up her hand. And I was disgusted by her. I was so harmed by her. And there was no transaction of forgiveness. There was no ability for me to see her as an image bearer, regardless of what she had done. There was no understanding in my mind that she was good, regardless of what she had done. And a lot of people are going to listen to me and, what do you mean? Serial killers are good and your mom was good? Because we are good because we've been made good, we've been made sanctified, right? Not because of something we've done. And so I also wonder if, and you have had so much loss in your life, but I also wonder if you and I perhaps forgive more easily because of that. Because it is so ingrained in my mind that at 19 years old, standing there and I can hear the beeps of the ventilator in my head right now, and looking down at the only hand that wasn't attached to tubes, and I couldn't pick up her hand, and I lived under such guilt and shame for so long for not forgiving her. And the more I got into counseling, of course, everybody knows how important counseling is. And we mention it all the time on this podcast. You've mentioned it here. It's a good place for me to mention that this is an altruistic podcast. It is not monetized. Any money that comes into this podcast goes to awarding scholarships for people that can't afford counseling. And so if you're interested in that, just hit that contact Amy button. We have actually awarded 3 scholarships this year, getting ready to award the 4th one in 2022, and that's been strictly by donations to the podcast. But I think that type 2s, we operate out of the heart center, right? And and so we have to investigate why we forgive. We know we need to forgive, and all the reasons that you mentioned coming into the episode, and we have to obey Ephesians 4:32. But we also need to recognize our value, and that so forgiving doesn't license that person to do it again, right? And so many times forgiveness means putting in place or removing the opportunity for them to hurt us again. And that's something I think we don't talk about enough, especially those of us that operate out of the heart center. We just want all to be well in the world. I mean, even though 9s are the peacemakers, and we don't have 9s in us, we just want all. Oh, we do, but that's not in our path. We just want all to be well in the world, and we operate out of here. And Chrissy tells me all the time, she's like, "Stop! You can't just operate out of here all the time,
right?
Because it means that we won't do the hard work of forgiveness." Right. Which is like, man, this hurts. That sucks.
Yep.
The whole impotence, Lindsay, of this series is I have a family member who I'm actively walking away from because the hurt has just been over and over and over and over. And while I still have to make the transaction of forgiveness, it doesn't mean that I place myself in the situation to continue to get hurt over and over. Do you agree with that?
I completely agree with that. I've had to do that with somebody in my family recently myself, and it is not an easy thing to do. It's very hard. and you just, it's not something you can rationalize in your head. It's part of it's out of protection, but really it's and guarding my heart, and to not want to be hurt again. And but
Wise.
it's a yeah, yeah, it's an unfortunate part of life, but it's okay. And and I'm also a believer that we have our biological family, but we also have, and we have a family of God, and but we also have our own circle,
Yeah.
of who we define as our family.
Yep.
And for one reason or another, I have one biological brother and I have two non-biological brothers.
Right.
And and I love their kids, as if they were my own biological nieces and nephews. And so it makes me feel whole, um to to and a little more, and it's something that I, for lack of a better word, I preach.
Yeah.
Family is a circle of friends who love you. It came on a keychain. I found it, I think, at Claire's in like fourth grade, and I still have it in my box. I have a memory box in my bedroom, and I still have that keychain today. And fourth grade was a very long time ago.
Just
um
yesterday. What are you talking about?
yeah, sorry. um but
I love that. I love that friends are the family you choose,
yeah.
and what's hard for me in this season of I must forgive, yet I want to use the word protect, but that's not what I must forgive, but it doesn't mean, and this is what I want my type 2 listeners out there, people, the nines, ones, and twos to hear when I say this, those of us that operate out of our heart, is it's okay to walk away.
Mm-hmm.
You're still commanded to forgive. It's okay to walk away.
That's right.
Sometimes the best gift, and people are going to hear this on all 9 episodes because it keeps popping up in my brain. Sometimes the best gift we can give somebody when we forgive them is the ability to do it again.
Right.
Because if who I walked away from learned something valuable from it, and maybe they come back in 10 years and they've learned and they've changed. And I had an interview today where that happened. He literally walked away from a family member for 10 years and went back, and the person had completely changed and the relationship was restored. And so, guys, if you're out there hearing me and you're in this heart center, the nines, ones, and twos, it's okay to walk away. That doesn't mean that you don't forgive, right? and
Right.
and so I think that's important. The other thing I really wanted to point out is two things as we explore the Enneagram internal profile for you. So the other number that you have access to is a 4,
Mm-hmm.
and so 4s have big emotions,
Oh yes.
and but more than that, 4s are incredibly creative, incredibly talented, and you are that, right? So you're able to tap into that type 4 musically. Tell us a little bit about how that has played into your healing, and if you can see any connection at all about how if you tap into that type 4, the good part of 4, whether it's that ridiculous voice you have or you play like 100,000 instruments, um, how tapping into that other part of you helps in this area of forgiveness.
So, from the music side of it, prior to my accident, I had chosen I had chosen music therapy as my first undergrad. And through a series of fortunate events, ended up changing the path at the very end. But music therapy and the art of music has been integral in my entire life. I first sat down at a piano, when I could hold my head up, and sat on my mom's lap. There's pictures of me at 6 months old, plunking along in the keys. And then that developed into singing, and then that developed into oboe, performance major, and English horn, and then because I wanted to be cool. And in the pep band, I learned how to play flute and percussion and all sorts of stuff. So music has been an integral part, not only for my healing and forgiveness, but also to feed into that creative side. And then that has also grown and woven itself into my full-time job as a communications officer, because and with public relations, because now I'm doing videos and I'm putting music with videos and trying to find the right music to go with the pictures and the message to elicit the, just that good feeling. And, and so everything comes full circle. And I don't think I would be creatively where I am today had that not been at my core from the very beginning. Um, and I was thinking back to, when you started to go down that path with talking about music, Amy, that even when I wrote my scholarship applications for going from my senior year of high school, I adamantly would say, and I firmly believe it, this God-given talent. It's not anything that, I mean, you have some musicians who, practice and practice and practice and practice, and they're flawless and perfect. But what was so hard for me to understand is it all just came so naturally.
Yeah.
And music having that natural ability is truly a gift from God. And being able to marry that together with my trauma and my grief and my recovery has been instrumental, no pun intended, but has been instrumental in helping me heal and helping me see that things aren't always as they seem.
Right.
That I have to get out of my head. And there were some songs that we identified in my previous stories, but the one that's been resonating most recently with me is I'm stuck in a moment and I can't get out of it, and it's a U2 song. And when I get in that moment, and now that for me, just singing that phrase over and over and over again will actually help pull me out of it.
Yeah.
And so for anybody out there listening, if you only listen to one particular type of music, whatever that is, that's great. I would ask you to explore other types of music. Listen to classical, listen to piano, and you're going to see foundationally that everything is connected. And
Yeah.
if you start really doing, if you do some research on Gene Simmons or Eminem or Snoop Dogg and see where they're, what helped, what propelled them to what musicians and what music types propelled
Pain.
them to where they are today, it's all foundational. It's all the same. And that's that same foundation that God created.
Right.
And that is what is so cool about it all, is it all comes back to the beginning.
It all comes back to the beginning and being able, and not all types have access as much access as we do to this creative for. Like, I didn't think I was creative at all. Like, I can't play I could barely play the radio. And so I would have often said I'm not at all creative, and yet I placed second in a writing contest, and I have a podcast, and I have creatively figured out how to live through this crazy life. And so the purpose of this, guys, is again, this book by Beth and Jeff McCord, More Than Your Number, that while Lindsay and I are twos, and we've talked about how we forgive as twos, and how the one comes in, and then the three for both of us, which is how it looked, but threes are performers as well. Lindsay, ironically, started out her career in emergency management, which is very type two of you. And so, look, when we understand how God made us, and the Enneagram is a tool to help us do that, not only does it help us understand how and why we forgive, but it helps us but it also gives us tools. And in your example, especially of the musical example, is even though I do not know how to play anything, music is my go-to. Like I will listen to music before anything, and I listen to everything from, I mean, like when I die and somebody gets my phone, I've got everything from Beethoven to Tupac on there and everything in between.
Me
And
too.
so those of us operating out of our heart center with the access to the four, to the creativeness, especially in times of pain, especially in times when we are working through something as heavy as forgiveness, remember that you're more than your number. You're more than a two, right? And so when you're walking around, you have access to heal yourself by remembering to hear the message of the one. You are good. The threes are performers. They're successful people. We have eight. We have access to eight, which is the reason why we can get way more done than most people in about half the time, and that's true about
Right.
you too. And you're
Right.
and for a long time you're in emergency management, and so again, just kind of bringing it full circle. The whole point of this series and this episode has been a little bit different than some of the other ones you're going to hear, where we do focus more on forgiveness, because Lindsay and I are both twos, but that we are more than our number, and especially those of us operating in the heart center who are going to be tempted just to glass over forgiveness and not
Right.
make the transaction because
Yep.
we don't want to hurt people's feelings. We would much rather be hurting in here than to
That's
hurt
right.
somebody else by having the hard conversation and the hard decision of forgiveness, right? So it's easy to
Yeah.
slap a Bible verse on it and say I did it and call it done. And
Right.
but the thing that we have to remember is that we are wanted and we are loved by the Most High God. And here is why the impotence of this podcast series came, because suddenly I understood my value, right? And when I understood my value, I began to understand the offenses against me. And I
Mm-hmm.
understood that those needed action, which in this case meant walking away. And
That's
so
right.
that's the full circle moment
Yep.
of the entire episode. Well, I always give the mic to my guests at the very end. And so I would love to know what you would have to say to other type twos out there who are walking through times where they need to forgive somebody, or maybe because they are a type two, they don't recognize that they need to forgive somebody. Parting words are yours. What would you love to say to other Enneagram type twos or those who love us?
Um, Three things. You are loved, you are enough, and you are not alone. And that's it.
You are definitely not alone. And Lindsay's stealing some of my thunder because she knows I don't leave a keyboard, a microphone, or a podium without closing by saying these words: you are seen, you are known, you are heard, you are loved. Loved, you're loved, type twos. And you're so valued. We'll be back here next week with, or excuse me, 2 weeks with our Enneagram type three, who happens to be my Enneagram coach, Carissa Harrison. Should be an interesting conversation since she knows so much more about the Enneagram than I do. But I do hope that you guys have been blessed by this and that you understand that the Enneagram can be used as a neutral tool to help you understand. And so until 2 weeks, you guys take care of yourself and remember all the things. Take care.
Here I am, you can see that I'm nowhere near where I want to be, but you remain so you.